Battle of the Wilderness, Chapter 7, Charley Skedaddle. Charley awoke, trembling at sunrise, to find a hand on his shoulder shaking him. Over the crackle of musket fire in the distance, a man's voice said in his ear, "Boy, get up, go to the colonel." Charley got up, fastened on his drum, and hurried to where he had seen his colonel lie down on a blanket, like any other soldier. Something important was happening for sure. Fallon was there with his bugle when he arrived. Colonel Ayres, a medium-sized, handsome, bearded man, turned from his officers to the two boys. "The Confederates know we're here. That skirmish fire you're hearing, they must have been just a few miles from us during the night. We're waiting to hear what orders General Griffin will give us." Charley dared ask, "We'll be fighting here in the wilderness, sir?" "It appears so. Go out with your instruments and get the men up and ready. It doesn't matter how much noise you make now." "Yes, sir," said Charley softly. Together he and the bugler left the officers. Fallon blew reveille, and Charley beat out the signal Silas had shown him to assemble the men. Things happened quickly after that. A rider came up at gallop down the Orange Turnpike to the 140th and the other units of the 1st Division. Griffin had ordered them to advance at 7:30 with their entire force to attack along the road. And by that hour, the whole division, thousands of men, was in full battle array. A moment after Charley heard the buglers of the various units sound the advance, the 140th and all the others started toward the turnpike and through the forest lining its sides, as they had been ordered. And then came what men feared most about this part of Virginia: getting lost. As soldiers moved forward, picking their way through the forest where twisting vines and thickets tore at their bodies, and small trees grew so close to each other that it was impossible to squeeze through, their progress was slowed. Each part of the trackless wilderness, though not far out of sight of the road, looked like every other part. Grimly, men walked onward, ever alert for the unseen enemy, but as they moved, they did not lose sight of one another and their regiments. Charley Quinn got lost with them, but by shouting and then by drumming his special signal, he finally was able to reassemble his scattered regiment in one spot. Pulling out Johnny's pocket watch, Charley saw that it was now late morning. They had been lost for hours. He cursed the wilderness. When all of the lost regiments of the 1st Division eventually reformed in the shelter of trees on the north side of the Orange Turnpike, two lines of attack were drawn up there. The 140th New York was on the left of the 1st Long Blue Line, and behind them stood their old Gettysburg comrades, the 146th New York, nicknamed Garrett's Tigers. At 10 minutes to noon, Colonel Ayres gave Fallon and Charley the order to sound and beat the charge. Charley drummed the long roll, a difficult signal that he had just mastered, and Fallon blew forward. The hoarse cheer that roared up from the men thrilled Charley to the soles of his shoes. He cheered with them as they ran south out of their forest cover in a line of bright bayonets in the midday sunshine and into the trees across the turnpike. Sprinting beside the color bearer, his heart beating as fast as his drum, Charley Quinn went forward with his regiment. As he ran and drummed, he whooped like an Indian or yelled, "Hi-yi!" along with the others around him. Yankee cannon that had been brought down the Orange Turnpike from Culpeper sent shells screeching over their heads to smash into the tree trunks, shattering them and sending limbs crashing down among the running men. Hundreds of sparrows fled shrieking from the mutilated trees. A red doe broke an alarm from her thicket and darted across the march of the 140th into a tall break in one graceful bounding motion. Unfortunately, they did not have ambulances during this time, boys and girls. Now unseen rebel skirmishes, sharpshooters sent out ahead of their regiments, commenced to fire on the advancing bluecoats. The crackle of rifles was suddenly all around Charley as he beat his drum with fingers slick with sweat. He saw men throw up their arms and fall on either side of him as he ran to keep pace with the color bearer. He stared down at the fallen soldiers in horror, but his drum beat drove him on as it did the others. Now realizing what he did, he moved along like the others, head downward, leaning forward as against a strong wind. So visualize this, boys and girls. This is a kid your age. Can you imagine seeing the horrors of this battle? These are men who fought for us, for what we have today. This really happened. So yesterday was wonderful to have off, wasn't it? But I hope it's sometime during Memorial Day yesterday, you took a couple of minutes to say thank you for the men, and today the men and women who sacrifice so much, sometimes even their lives for us. So this battle right now that's going on, even though I joked earlier about the ambulance, just because the sirens, this is no joking matter. You realize this, the intensity of what's going on. He's in the middle of it. Now, do you think he's scared?
Yes.
Of course, they're all scared, but their courage drives them forward. At Sanders Field, a clearing with a gully in it, the advancing boy caught sight of his first Johnny Rebs. Men not in gray as he expected, but in butternut brown. They were running away, looking over their shoulders as they fled down the gully and up over the slope onto the other side. The 140th came after them without a pause. Charley heard Colonel Ayers shouting, "Steady, steady, men, steady!" And Charley came along steadily, his blood drumming in his ears and his thoughts disconnected and fleeting, of Noreen and her sewing machine, of Broadway's traffic which he dodged so nimbly, of the dead rabbit he had fought. The 140th soon learned why the rebels had given up the fight and fled so easily before them. It had been a trap. Hundreds of Confederates lay at the top of the gully behind felled trees made into breastworks. Down in the gully, Charley Quinn's regiment drew a hideous crossfire from rebel-filled stands of timber in front of them and to the right. Driven on itself, the 140th crowded to the left back toward the Orange Turnpike Road. Charley went with him, keeping close to his colonel. As he stood next to the officer, drumming the long roll steadily, a rebel mini ball, a small, round, hollow musket shell, whistled past his left elbow and smashed into the head of his drum. No sound could come from it now. Charley stood motionless, staring at it, drumsticks lifted. Then, all at once, a hoarse shout, "Hurrah, boys, hurrah!" attracted his attention, and to his right he saw Jim Miller shouting for all he was worth, his legs pumping toward the Confederates' logs. The boy looked on it in horror as Jim dropped his musket, spread wide his arms, and crumpled to the ground at the bottom of the gully. Jim? Jim dead? Dead in the early afternoon light of such a warm spring day? It could not be. In Charley's brain, something howled, "No!" Charley ran to his fallen friend. A quick glance showed him in the red hole in his forehead, the mark of a sharpshooter. In a flash, Charley had Jim's musket to his shoulder. The man had been a careful soldier. He had a fresh charge in it as if he was running to meet the enemy. Taking aim, little Charley Quinn chose his man, a lanky, brown-bearded Confederate standing atop the logs, looking for a target for his own musket. Charley fired. The rebel dropped his gun and clutched at his shoulder. Blood began to well between his fingers, and he fell backward over the breastworks. Now the truth flooded Charley's consciousness. Gone were the thoughts of heroism. Gone were the thoughts of revenge. He had shot a man. He was only 12 years old, and he had shot and killed a human being. What should he do now? He didn't know. He cried out wordlessly, threw down Jim's musket, and with the useless drum banging at his hip, sprinted for the wooded clearing to the left. Musket balls speeding toward him hummed bee-like and tore away fragments of cloth from his sleeve and trousers. As he ran, he spied Silas Gorman lying sprawled not 30 feet away. He could see him clearly, though, through drifting curls of smoke. Silas had torn away the seams of one leg of his trousers and was staring down at a bloody wound on his shin. He saw Charley and beckoned to him, his mouth open in a call for help that could not be heard over the shouting, screaming, and crackling and booming that filled the gully. Silas wanted him. Silas needed him. But Charley Quinn did not break his stride to go to his friend. He ran on among the dead and the wounded, racing faster and stumbling forward. Something strange happened to his vision. Everything he saw was crystal clear. Fluffy white smoke drifting over the clearing from all the firing going on. Falling leaves clipped by musket balls and open red mouths of the yelling, charging men of the 140th. And the startled eyes of Con Sullivan as he and Charley were fleeing. Charley, was fleeing. As the boy ran, he heard Con's voice bellowing, "Charley Skedaddle, go on, run away! Run, ye coward, Bowery bum!" An officer picked up Sullivan's cry. "Run, run! Run home to your mama!" he shouted and lifted his pistol to shoot at Charley, but he did not pull the trigger. Stay with him, please, boys. Running toward the end of the blue coat troops, Charley spotted Don Whaley, the dead rabbit, who had recognized him that first day in Culpeper. He didn't shout at him, but he watched as Charley streaked past. Other men who knew him as the regimental drummer boy saw and marked him with their eyes. An officer at the rear swatted at him with the flat of his sword to drive him back and missed. Charley Quinn kept on running to the left even when he'd passed by all of the men of the 140th New York. He ran like a fear-crazed animal up over the rim of the gully until a clump of roots lying in his path brought him down to a crashing halt, flat on his face. There he lay for a little while, panting for breath. The sound of firing and yelling behind him came clearly to his ears. He got up, detached the useless drum from its sash, and dropped both it and the sash onto the earth. The drumsticks were behind him where he had dropped them at the clearing. He lurched over the little creek coming out of the swamp, and he'd passed, drumming proudly just a few minutes before. He bent down to cup water to soothe his burning face. Then he got up, waded across the water, and followed the swamps quite a distance to a particularly dense thicket of undergrowth. Crawling inside of it, Charley sat with his head on his drawn-up knees, listening to the battle, trying to pray, sobbing in shame and misery of the desertion. In his mind, he saw Johnny's and Jim's and Silas's accusing faces. He could hear Con's well-remembered voice taunting him. As the boy sat there, a terrorized rabbit came leaping into the thicket to snuggle with wild-eyed against his arm. Charley looked at its quivering sides and trembled whiskers. The battle had made a runaway, a skedaddler, out of it too. But it was only a rabbit. It wasn't a soldier. A rabbit could be expected to run. But not Charley Quinn. That skedaddler had killed a man, and then he had turned and run. And everybody knew it. Deep sobs racked Charley's body. He threw himself full length into the earth, pounding it, startling the rabbit that had sought refuge by him, making it pin back its ears and lope away. He'd failed this poor frightened creature too. Charley sat up again, folded his arms on his knee, and laid his head on the blue cloth. He was not fit to wear.